welcome back to the Ninja Chuan podcast. Today we continue our discussion of Wang Shu Jin with a article from the Pa Kua Journal, Volume 2, Number 2, with Wang's student Manfed Rottmann. Manfred was a Canadian who trained with Wang in the early 70s and up until Wang's death in 1981, and then continued with Wang's student Wang Fulai. So Manfred talks about his early training with Wang in Japan and then the differences in training as an indoor student in Taiwan versus his early training in Japan. And then in our Patreon this week, we continue our discussion of the Qi disease controversy from Inside Kung Fu from 1992. So check that out. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Today we continue our investigation into the life of internal martial arts Grand Master Wang Shu Jin of Taiwan. Master Wang lived from 1904 to 1981. So we're going to look at another interview with one of his students. This time it's from the same issue of Pa Kua Journal newsletter we were talking about last time, Volume 2, Issue 2, 1992, with the Canadian Manfed Rottmann, who's been writing articles for a long time. Back in the day, he was one of the folks speaking on Pa Kua and Xingyi before most others. So Dan Miller starts off by giving a little introduction to Manfred and his training. He started off as a black belt at age 15 and at age 18, he had achieved his black belt in a few variety of martial arts and set off to train in Japan to get the real deal. And then there he learned Japanese martial arts. But Manfred Rottmann first heard of Wang Shu Jin while talking with martial artist and author Don Draeger after a choreo practice session in Tokyo. During the conversation, Draeger and another martial artist both stated that the best internal martial artist they had ever seen was Wang Shu Jin. Draeger had also studied Tai Chi with Wang Shu Jin. Rottmann wondered why Draeger, who was skilled in many styles of martial arts, would want to study something like Tai Chi. Draeger replied that on one occasion he had tried to throw Wang and felt an explosive palm hit him from 1 inch distance, which caused him to buckle over. Draeger explained that at that moment he became an ardent believer in the internal styles and wanted to learn as much as he could. This interested Rottmann, and he began a search for Wang Shu Jin.
Pretty common story of meeting one
Right.
and flattened.
Kaboom! So that's how people got into internal martial arts back in the day. You get knocked down and then begin seeking it out. But yeah, Master Wang, it was, last time his student Huang was talking about how Wang would go to Japan to teach and encourage people to take on the internal styles. And he did that by beating the hell out of people and letting them take their best shot and then slamming them. So in that way, he brought in many recruits into the internal styles. Yeah, so there was a generation of foreigners who were coming to train, and Don Draeger kept pointing them towards Wang Shu Jin. So after an intensive search in Tokyo, and with assistance of his Shotokan karate instructor, Rottmann was able to locate Wang. Wang was teaching a group of 100 karateka the Xingyi basics. After the practice session, one of the Goju-Ryu karate masters introduced Rottmann to Wang. Speaking of this first meeting, Rottmann states, "I will never forget when he turned and looked at me. He radiated power from his eyes. This is referred to as shun energy, as I later discovered, and is mainly acquired through the San Ti, Three Heavens Forces stake standing method taught to Wang Shu Jin by Wang Shangzai." And so that was his first meeting. The gaze of Wang Shu Jin was just electrical with power. And he does look like a pretty unique and intense looking guy. Like, he doesn't strike me as a frivolous person. Like, every picture of him is just like serious as fuck.
Yeah. Presence,
Just radiating presence. And he attributes it to that San Ti standing where you build, which is said to be focused on intention, training the mind to be incredibly focused in one unwavering, immobile, unpushable, powerful force. And so maybe that was where he developed that. So it says both Wang Shu Jin and his student Wang Fulai, who were not related, taught in Tokyo in the early 70s. Rottmann explains that the students began training with Tai Chi and with San Ti from Xingyi. After approximately 6 months of training, the student could progress to the study of Xingyi Wu Xing Chuan if Wang approved and learn the five elements training. So that's interesting that he would give you 6 months of San Ti alongside Tai Chi training because that's nice. Sort of you get the fluidity and the relaxation of Tai Chi in your system, but then you get that really structured intention of San Ti. I mean, that sounds like basically exactly the way Kumar taught you.
I had done some Neigong courses, but first 6 months was basically learning the short form and the just Peachman, but
Basically San Ti standing.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of a nice combo. So it says a typical practice session with Wang Shujin was 3 hours in duration. The first 30 minutes consisted of 6 postures of the basic stake standing method. So that sounds like the I Chuan standing, followed by 60 minutes of Tai Chi practice. And then the final hour and a half was spent on specialized training, with each individual studying either Xingyi, Bagua, or both. Wang observed the students' training, and when he felt they were ready to move on, he would teach them the next level of techniques. Whenever Wang Shujin was absent, Wang Fulai would teach the daily training. Rottmann states that there were only a few students in Japan that were taught beyond the basic training levels. The first Pa Kua Journal drill that was taught was Lianhuan Zhang. I think that refers to the first set of 8 palm changes.
Right. Wong had those two different sets.
Right. So you had the first set of palms you'd learn. Students who Wang accepted to progress beyond this point were required to travel to Taiwan for more detailed instruction.
Mm.
In Taiwan, Wang taught daily at the amphitheater of the Taichung Grand Central Park. He also taught privately at his residence in a sealed-off training area directly below his bedroom. When Rottmann traveled to Taiwan for further training, he indicates that the daily sessions were in a closed-door, private basis. Wang was very direct in his teaching and liked to teach by doing. He demonstrated techniques and applications, but did not usually provide technical explanations. Rottmann says that the student got from Wang was the final product, not a detailed breakdown of the technique. Fortunately, his assistant Wang Fulai did provide the technical instruction, the detailed explanations, and exactness that created the final product. By learning from both instructors, Rottmann was able to develop his own skill. In 1978, after a formal examination, Wang accepted Rottmann as a disciple and presented him with a certificate. The acceptance ceremony required Rottmann to take an oath to Wang, and after being accepted as a formal disciple, Rottmann was taught further stages of the stake standing method, higher levels of Baguazhang training, and other specific methods of training, such as push hands and Jing training that were associated with the 3 internal styles taught by Wang. Since Wang Shujin's death in 1981, Rottmann has continued to study with Wang Fulai. So that's interesting that you'd learn the basic form, but if you wanted to go any further, you had to become an official indoor student and come learn from Wang one-on-one. So that does sound like what the other students of his that we've talked to have went through as well.
Yep.
And also the idea that Wang wouldn't teach you the step-by-step. He'd just whomp you with the technique, then expect you to kind of figure it out yourself,
I think that's where Bruce went to Hung Yishang to get the step by step and later with Liu Hongjae and Baiwa, right? Like Wong he's the power overall kind of
power trumps all. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so he wasn't big on technical explanations. Like he was more about doing. Enough talk. Let's start slapping people around.
or just stand for, the
Or
standing thing is another good example, right? Just starting every class where you just make people stand for 30, 40 minutes. I mean,
sounds a lot like our classes back in the day.
yeah, I mean, but that if you do that, whether you like it or not, you're starting to get
Right?
that practice in there. So,
Right? Explanation or not, just the sheer standing training time just forces your body to settle and become heavier and groundeder and more connected. So Manfred begins by explaining the Lianhuanzhang process. Lianhuanzhang, linked or continuous circle palms, is the first formal drill within Wang's Pa Kua system. With this drill, a student learned the fundamental basics of Bagua. Principles emphasized were gazing, sitting, dropping, rising, walking, turning in or out, and of course the eight mother palms. Further, a student learned to use will, not force, to mesh the parts of the body while twisting, turning, or spinning. In the beginning, a student had enough to do by simply following his index finger while walking and maintaining the basic circling posture. Balance and coordination of breathing while becoming comfortable usually was enough to cause one to sweat buckets. So that's that first phase of training, those first eight palms. So he mentions principles like gazing. So that's looking at the finger, sitting, that's sinking into the posture, dropping, rising, lifting at the top of the head, walking, kobu, baibu,
Right. Well,
stuff like that.
regardless of the particulars of the form, it's like when we talked about Lowe's thing, he has the linked and the smooth, he
Mm.
uses the same words essentially.
Yeah, it's true. Lian Huan
The,
and Yu Shen. Yeah.
the idea that, you got to start with a sort of staccato, not slow, but like deliberate, where every move you're going, okay, what am I doing? What's the,
Precise, maybe.
yeah, and like just going through the like ABCs of everything. And then that second stage is the quote unquote linked stage where you're starting to put things that were, individual movements essentially into a linked, you know, continuous form, right? And then the final stage being where it goes to that smooth thing of the the forms become secondary to the continuous nature of the change, so like it goes even further towards that thing of improvisation based on what you're feeling.
And it says many people think that this task was easy. However, to do it correctly, form the basics that an individual would need for proper progression and further techniques. Someone not versed in good fundamentals always had trouble in the later stages. They would usually lean in or out, lose balance, wobble, and they had trouble knowing where their feet were when they needed them most.
Definitely learning to know where your feet are, hardest parts about bagua, because what happens when you start spinning around is people kind of just like lose where they're, where they started, so the instead of each step being half a turn, you start getting where each step is like one might be, three quarters of a turn, and the next one's three quarters of a turn. So now you've done more of a turn than you thought you were going to do. So you weren't facing the way you thought you were. So you just keep
Mm,
turning, and it distorts, like you just kind of get confused with where you're going. And so I think that's where that first stage of just, okay, my right foot's going to turn in towards the circle, my left foot's going to go to the outside, I'm going to turn my body this way, I'm going to come back around, all that kind of stuff. Because as you speed up, like that starts to get flustered, especially with when you start doing more complicated movements.
yeah. And that's that grind of Bagua that you don't, it can be frustrating because you're circling and circling over and over, and some days you're feeling hella wobbly, and some days you're losing concentration, and you just got to keep stacking and keep layering and just keep adding bit by bit or subtracting bit by bit, depending on how you look at it. And you don't notice yourself becoming smoother and more connected and more grounded. All you see is your faults. So
Yeah,
it can be frustrating, but it's layering inside you bit by bit and strengthening and weaving all those connections.
right. And that's where I think acknowledging the phases that you're going through
Mm,
limits your expectation essentially, right? And part of it is to not think that you have to do it perfectly right off the bat, and
yeah.
that Boggle is a slog in the beginning because you're learning how to do something that you've never done before while moving, right? So
Hmm.
I think the way I describe it to people is you're learning how to juggle while learning how to unicycle, right? Because you're doing things with your arms that you've never done before, and you're doing things with your legs that you've never done before, and they're different things, right?
So he says, in all systems taught by either Wang Shu Jin or Fu Lai, the following principles were very important. So he says them in Chinese, but in English it says allowing the head to raise up without forcing it, sinking the qi to the dantian, and hanxiang babe, curve the back, relax the chest. Now in Bagua, of course, one had to walk forward in a circle while maintaining the waist in an X above the line of the circle. The upper torso was twisted in towards the circle. Elbows hung down as if a weight were attached to them. This lowered and relaxed the shoulders. The general feeling was to be weighted down both by the dantian and by slightly bent knees. Circling, toe in, toe out, and spinning were all part of this basic drill. This drill only seemed basic until one learned through training that every move, every inch of a move, had a definite application. Once, when I asked Wang Fulai, "Where's the hit in this move?" he replied, "Where's there no hit?" The purpose and utility of every move changed as you progressed. So that's pretty solid. Like, those principles are basic ones you find in all of the internal martial arts of raising up the head, sinking the chi to the dantian, stretching out from the inside out, kind of. Those are common principles that aren't easy to get, but are
Yeah, well,
definitely.
that's what I think this first stage is really about. Is this is where you're learning to do the mechanical stuff, like um, uh, Lotus shoot talked about, that sort of using the techniques, so you learn the techniques first,
Hmm.
and then the techniques become, something smooth. That sort of post heaven leads you to the pre-heaven
Hmm.
idea,
Hmm.
right? That I think in some ways there's what did Lo say? He said basically like each technique, if you're doing a strike, that strike could become a throw. If you're doing a throw, that throw could become a kick or a strike, right? Like that, you're not doing a particular type of hit. You're doing a technique that could be any of those things,
Right.
right?
Your
So
body's just moving. What
yeah,
happens to the other person depends a little bit on what they do, kind of.
yeah, or how they react. Yeah, exactly. How they react to what you're doing, right? And that's a hard thing to get because basically what it means is when something's coming at your face, you don't move your hand to block the thing. You move your whole body, right? Or in the same way, if you want to hit something, you don't move your hand, you move your whole body. And
Yeah.
that just kind of getting to that sort of um, Bruce talked about a bullfighter, right? That that the first thing you got to learn is get out of the way of the bull,
Hmm.
right? Because most martial arts are about kill the bull. Like you don't, yeah, you just gonna kill it. But Masayama, just bam. But this is more like get out of the way first and then do something, right?
Right.
Put yourself in a safe, and all the angle changing stuff. I mean, that's what I think guys like Wong and Hung, and their students really understand is how, again, it's not every technique, it's every part of every technique, right? I mean, every little twist, every little like, elbow bend, every shoulder move in a sense has the potential to become at least another technique, right? And that's kind of like I said, that's a hard one to get your brain around, especially if you're used to doing things where, each arm movement is a technique, right? Like, this is a block, this is a punch, this is, whatever, right? So that mental shift is tricky.
Definitely.
Even going from other internal martial arts, it's tricky. I mean, forget about going from external.
Right. I mean, the philosophy is the same, but in Bagua, the complications multiply.
Yeah.
So he says it is a never-ending process. There were several ways this drill was trained. It and all circular drills could be trained as in Tai Chi, slowly, for building up energy or Jing. The single palm change could be trained over and over while walking the circle. Though the circling drills of Wang's system are usually shown at mid-speed and middle basin, they are practiced in several different ways. It depends on a person's feeling that particular day. If you had difficulty with a particular technique, it was isolated and repeatedly practiced until it felt balanced, smooth, and above all natural. You should balance the practice on both sides of the body. In most martial arts systems, the trainings were somehow slanted for the right-handed person. It was interesting as a left-handed individual to find out that Wang was also left-handed. It says there's 3 levels of circle walking: high, middle, and low. In the beginning, a student used the high method with the knees slightly bent, as there were other basics to become accustomed to. The use of the word walking is somewhat incorrect, as the Bagua steps are more of a gait than a walk. These 3 levels of circle walking, sometimes called the 3 basins, also involve different stretching, coiling, twisting, and positioning of the various parts of the body at each level. So that's pretty basic Bagua mentality. You practice on both sides. You walk until you're smooth. You overdo it by just walking and walking and walking. And you start off in a higher stance so it doesn't strain your knees. But over time, I expect you get to work a little bit of a lower stance
Yeah, and
to sort of work them harder.
I think it's also like you said, it's you just have other concerns. You're trying to remember hand motions and
Right.
body positions and all this stuff. And I think just kind of the yeah, just making it easier on yourself essentially. But
Yeah.
usually, I mean, I think what ends up happening is you kind of go from the high, the low, and then you end up sort of finding the middle, right? That
Hmm.
like you said, you kind of underdo it, overdo it, and then you figure out what your comfort zone is, which may
Hmm.
be, for depending on your skill level, pretty low, but it's just like, you know, you find your Goldilocks point.
Definitely. And the idea of it's a gait rather than a walk, that's an interesting distinction. I've never thought of it that way, but it's true. Bagua circle walking isn't like a normal walking. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like there's principles so it's a type of walking. I guess a gait is a skilled type of walking that's not normal stuff.
Right.
So he says when walking, jing is used in every step. This develops a springy, coiling energy in the legs, as opposed to Xingyi's thrust with the rear leg, as if pushing the upper torso over a stream. The Bagua circle step had many functions, one of which is to evade the opponent's strike while advancing into his corner or slightly behind him. Rather than treading in mud, a person appears as if he were an eagle ready to pounce on its prey. I was amazed after 4 months of training in Taiwan by the ease with which I weaved around and through the masses of people on the streets of Taichung at noon. This was a natural application of Bagua. When I told Wang of this magical feat, he simply laughed. So he makes a distinction between Bagua stepping, the springy, coiled energy in the legs, as opposed to Xingyi's thrusting half step, which I think that's definitely a good contrast.
The way I describe it is, Shingi does a step, Bagua walks, right? So in Bagua, you don't do one step and then stop. It's always one step immediately leading into the next. So that's where that unicycle analogy, right? You're trying to make both feet into something that's continuously rolling like a wheel, basically, right? So the way a wheel always has, it's always a different part of the wheel touching the ground, but there's always a part of the wheel touching the ground, right? And that's kind of where, and it never stops,
Right.
when you're going because you fall.
And maybe that's what he means by springy. The legs remain loaded at all times. Where in Xingyi, you unload that every once in a while with a Fa Jin kind of movement.
Hmm.
Like there's an explosion. But in Bagua, in the circle walking forms, especially, they're never truly like kaboom. There's always a
Tiger
springiness that's like
versus a
loaded.
grasshopper. right? Xingyi's a
Mm.
grasshopper. It loads up, doing, and springs
Uh,
out. Bagua's like a little spider that can just
Diggity,
go
diggity. Yeah, yeah.
in all directions.
Not to say that you couldn't do those explosive movements, but those are usually it's like single drills where you do a chopping drill or a, something like that. So next, the interviewer asks, when you traveled to Taiwan, what other aspects of Bagua were revealed to you? Manfred says, basically, I relate my learning to the peeling of an onion. What was assumed to be a good level of technique was found to only be the top layer of the onion. Everything I was taught in Japan was retaught, with corrections at every level. After becoming a closed door student, techniques were taught that had not been shown before. In Taiwan, I learned the stake standing of Bagua. This could be performed while walking the circle and maintaining one fixed torso posture. The basic circling posture, phoenix, hawk, monkey, etc. The stake standing was also performed in Xingyi and Tai Chi. The body was held motionless except for breathing and the shaking of your entire body as it became accustomed to the position. Various postures were used for this. In any case, the stake standing of Bagua reinforces the twisting, stretching, and coiling actions of Bagua. Heavy emphasis on relaxing the waist for flexibility. The circling method of stake standing was sometimes practiced for half an hour in one direction before changing to the opposite direction. Important points included deep breathing, following the breath to the dantian, non-thinking, all thoughts were to be let go rather than pushed out, maintaining the proper postures, twisting, gazing at the index finger, cultivating the chi all the way to the fingertips and then to the other parts of the body at will. And 5, you were meditating while you walked the circle. So this is that indoor training, which is, so he says that the holding postures were part of the indoor training. And they
Well,
go 30 minutes in one direction and then switch.
well, and it's interesting how he refers to, the practice is standing even when you're walking,
Right.
right?
Stake standing while you walk.
that everything is standing essentially, right? That you don't lose that sense of being, in your standing posture where everything is connected in a ball essentially, even when you start moving.
The next thing is that this is sort of the end of the interview with Manfred Rottmann. He says, what higher levels of training did you receive after being accepted as a formal disciple? The first honor after the formal ceremony was to be accepted as a family member by Wang and his other disciples. On a technical basis, all instruction was behind closed doors. An oath was sworn as to what you could teach without permission. I was taught how to tell when a Tuisho opponent really meant to hurt you internally before his hand even moved. I was also taught how to recognize an internal martial arts expert simply by examining his walk and natural body movements. I was taught when and how to send chi via mental control to various parts of the body, how to pulse the chi, and how to run and still maintain the basic principles of internal practice to cultivate chi, relax the upper torso, and maintain deep natural breathing while running. I was taught the stages of chi development, tendon changes, and how this training would manifest itself physically in your own body and in others. I learned how to determine if a person was overtraining either Xingyi or Bagua from observing external indicators. There were higher level drills in Bagua and the short method Xingyi for changing the bones and sinews. I learned there were further onions to peel, knowledge to learn, techniques to feel, practice, and analyze. This system never ends, and now I think back to 1981 when Wang Shu Jin died. He had written that after 50 years of training the 3 internal styles, he dared not say that he was skilled in all 3. I'm still learning and satisfied by doing that. I am humbled by the greatness and generosity of both of my instructors in accepting and teaching me. That's interesting. He's talking about once he became a disciple, he got more instruction from Master Wang of really how to observe and sort of take in the information. My impression is like he was teaching you how to look at people and really see what they're doing from a deeper level.
I think at a certain point, you're not really, there's no more forms to learn, and you understand the mechanics of it, and so you start getting into the deeper parts of what these arts can, be applied to and things like that, and just kind of And that depends on your interest, right? You might be martial arts, might be meditation, might be healing other people, but there's a point where the teacher's job becomes not to teach you new stuff, but to take what you know and kind of condense it or